Geppetto's puppet. We need your help.
To think that you forgive a foolish old man his memories. I believed you were a good boy. Won't you help me, son?
Lies of P is almost perfect. Out of all of the Souls-like games that I've played, this is by far the best. And honestly, if I hadn't known, I probably would have thought that this was also made by From Software. Hi, I am Fossil21. I like playing games and I like making videos, so if you guys enjoy the content, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the page. 2023 has been absolutely jam-packed with excellent games, especially if you're a Souls fan, with Wulong earlier this year, Remnant 2, and now Lies of P. Plus, we also just got Lords of the Fallen that just came out. Us Souls fans are eating good this year. I've been following Lies of P ever since it got revealed, what seems like forever ago, and needless to say, it's absolutely delivered. It's no secret that Lies of P draws heavy inspiration from the From Software's Bloodborne, which I'm personally down for, as Bloodborne is one of my favorite games of all time. And honestly, this is probably the closest thing we're ever going to get to a Bloodborne sequel. I'm going to try to keep this video as spoiler-free as I can, but there is some things I do want to talk about and some things I want to put up on screen that are definitely in spoiler territory, so here is your warning. Starting off right at the beginning, let's talk about the story. The story takes place in the city of Krat, which is where you'll spend most of your time playing. You play as Geppetto's greatest puppet, Pinocchio. Hence the name Lies of P. The whole city has been overrun with evil puppets, and as you go throughout the city trying to find Geppetto and trying to find out why all this is happening. One of my favorite things about this game is their unique twist on the beloved fairy tale. For example, whenever Pinocchio would lie, his nose would grow. But here in this game, whenever Pinocchio lies, he starts to feel himself become more human. And the more Pinocchio lies, the more he turns into a real boy. There is a painting of you in Geppetto's office, and you can see that the more that you lie, the nose on that painting continues to grow, and it's kind of a tracker to see how much humanity you have as you're playing throughout the game. There's even an entire ending that is solely based on how many times you've lied throughout the game or how truthful you were. So that's really cool that they tie in the whole Pinocchio lying into the story. I also really like the twist with the blue fairy. I thought it was really great. The main bad guy more or less uses her as a giant battery to siphon magic from her so that he can become a god. Yeah, some pretty heavy stuff. Overall, I enjoyed the story and the unique spin that they put on the traditional fairy tale. That, and I also think that the story itself is a little bit easier to understand opposed to many other some Souls-like games, in part due to the excellent voice acting in the game. Pinocchio himself doesn't talk all that much, but all the characters that do a fantastic job. Plus, I really liked where they teased the story is going to go next. I won't spoil it here, but I'm totally on board for it. As I mentioned earlier, I think this is the closest non-From Software game to really capture that Souls feeling. Combat is very weighty and satisfying, and just like Bloodborne, the game encourages you to play more aggressively, as they have a system very similar to the Bloodborne rally system. But here you hold the block button to take reduced damage, and for a very short window you can attack and you'll be able to get all of that health that you lost. On the flip side though, if you do perfect block, or essentially a parry, you'll take no damage and instead you'll build up the enemy's stagger, which done enough times can open them up for a visceral attack. Personally, I had a really hard time mastering the perfect blocks, or essentially parries in this game. I felt like that the window to pull it off was very small and tight, and oftentimes I ended up just missing, with only me really mastering it somewhat towards the end of the game, as the last boss of the game pretty much requires you to parry this dude or perfect block, otherwise he just deletes your health bar. Lies of P is hard, like really hard. I don't think it's the hardest like Souls-like game or harder than like Bloodborne or From Software, but it's definitely up there. A lot of the bosses here I struggled on quite a bit. Not only do all of the standard enemies hit really hard, but all of the mini bosses are also incredibly hard, with a ton of them pretty much deleting your health bar in 2 hits. That said, I did really enjoy all of the enemy designs, all of the mini boss designs themselves. All the enemies look really cool, and I like that. One of my biggest criticisms I do have with the enemies, and this applies to mini bosses and bosses as well, is that a lot of these enemies just had very, very, very delayed attacks. Delayed attacks aren't uncommon in Souls games, but I feel like most of my deaths or mistakes were because it was harder to read the enemy's attacks, especially to them having so many very delayed attacks. They also had delayed attacks where the enemy would glow red, which meant that they had to be perfect blocked. And with perfect blocking being so tight, that meant I got hit more times than I actually blocked. And in most cases, it honestly was just easier to hold block and try to attack them back to get my health back than it was to pull off those perfect blocks. Some of the things that I actually really enjoyed about the game was the weapon crafting as well as the Legion arm. Starting off with the weapon crafting, all of the normal weapons have a blade and a handle that can be freely swapped to mix and match new weapons. Essentially, it boils down to the blade determines how much damage you put out, and the hilt determines what Fable Art you will use. Fable Arts are super powerful attacks that has a little gauge that fills up, and once that's filled up, you can do either very powerful attacks, you can do a parry, you can do a perfect block, or even transform your weapon. It really just depends on what hilt you're using, as it'll determine which Fable Arts you have. The downside to all of this is that not all weapons were created equally. The game is very fast-paced, just like Sekiro, making all of those strength weapons kind of obsolete, as many of them are very powerful but extremely slow, which opens you up to getting hit more times than I care to admit. And honestly, it just makes the strength build in the game kind of not viable. Or not as much. You could definitely use strength weapons. I just had a much harder time than opposed to using a dex build or something that was just much faster than these big DPS strength weapons. As cool as crafting the weapons is and mixing and matching to get different weapons, pretty much once you get a hold of some boss weapons, you never really go back to those normal weapons. Like, as cool as it is to make a bunch of cool designs, it's just the boss weapons are just all around better in almost every aspect. Not only that, but the boss weapons can't be disassembled, which is kind of lame. Despite that, I still had a lot of fun mixing and matching, trying to find out cool weapons. I'd get like a very high DPS strength thing, and I'd put on a teeny tiny hammer so that I can have that same moveset as that little tiny hammer did. So it was really fun, and there's enough there that it never got boring or stale. Lots of fun with the weapon crafting. Along with the weapons is your Legion arm, and this plays a big role in the combat and overall gameplay of liesofP. There are many different Legion arms. Basically, it's you're a puppet, but it's a robotic arm that you could freely swap out to. You have one arm that will blast out electricity, another arm that will shoot out a timed explosive projectile, and my personal favorite, the puppet string, which is like a grapple that can pull enemies towards you. And even cooler, you can pull yourself towards enemies and launch yourself in the air, opening yourself up for a slam attack that does devastating damage. Overall, with the Legion arm and the weapons and all the enemies, made for a great gameplay experience. Overall, I thought the combat was really great and made the moment-to-moment gameplay really fun. What really makes or breaks all of these Souls likes is the bosses, and liesofP absolutely delivers on the bosses. One thing liesofP does really well is the presentation of all of these bosses, from the cutscenes to the epic boss battles, music, everything. Some of my favorite boss fights were Romeo's boss fight, Laxasia, I'm probably saying that wrong, and the Nameless Puppet were all very well done boss fights. There's a ton in here, but those are just the ones just right off the top of my head. A few criticisms that I do have with the bosses, and extent, this isn't just the bosses, but more or less the last, maybe 3/4 of the game, the difficulty just spiked way up. And not just with bosses, with standard enemies, with everything. I felt like I'd go to a new area and just the random normal enemies were two-shotting me. And then the last 4 to 5 bosses were much harder than anything else in the game. And like I said, it's not just the bosses, but a lot of the normal enemies as well, especially the mini-bosses. I think I died more to these dudes here than a lot of the main bosses put together. These mini-bosses freaking sucked. I hated them so much. Another con that I had with the bosses is that there were some that had attacks that would more or less be, they would start their attack off screen to where you couldn't see them, and it made it almost impossible to either block or dodge. For example, the green monster that you fight, it does some attacks with its tentacles that actually start behind him, so you don't actually see it coming, and the only reason I got it is after getting hit so many times, I just have to remember that it's coming. And another example would be in the Laxasia. In the second phase, she throws a ton of lightning at you right off the get-go, and after the lightning, she instantly launches at you, and the timing I could never get right. She hit me every single time, and the hard part is that you don't see her coming, so you just have to kind of get the timing right and expect when she's gonna shoot at you. Same with like that green monster, you don't actually see these attacks happening because either they're behind them, they're off screen, or there's something in the way every single time to where you can't properly prepare yourself for the attack coming. Other than those things, I quite enjoyed all of the boss fights. As brutal and crazy as they were, I had a blast. Last thing that I do want to mention is the game's performance. I mainly played on a PlayStation 5, although I did play a little bit here and there on my Xbox Series S. It was available on Game Pass, so I tried it out for a little bit on there as well. And for the most part, I didn't encounter any glitches or game-breaking bugs. And in fact, the game ran at a pretty steady frame rate for most of my playthrough. I didn't really notice any hiccups or hitches or frame drops, and if there were, I personally didn't notice them. The game overall looks absolutely incredible, and I loved the dark aesthetic that the world Krot provides. The level design was fantastic, and I really enjoyed just soaking it all in and going through each of these levels. Was a really fun time. Lies of P is absolutely fantastic, and I've been eagerly waiting for this game ever since it got launched, what seems like forever ago, and honestly I did not expect for it to be this good. This is this studio's very first game, if I remember correctly, and I was totally blown away at how good and how polished this game really was. And I said this earlier in the video, but if I honestly didn't know beforehand that this wasn't a From Software game, I totally would have thought, I would have been like, oh yeah, From Software made this. This is like Bloodborne 2. And like I said, Lies of P is just almost perfect. There's a few like little things here and there that prevent it from giving me that perfect score, but man, this game was so good. I loved the dark world of Krot. I loved the interesting and unique twist that they played on the beloved fairy tale of Pinocchio. All the boss fights were excellent. The voice acting was excellent. The music was excellent. For all of these things, that is why I'm going to give Lies of P a 9 out of 10. And really, outside a few minor things, this is probably one of the best games I have played this year. And 2023 has been jammed-packed full of just absolutely great games. This is definitely one I would not miss, especially if you guys are a Souls fan like I am. This is a must play. It is available on Game Pass, which is awesome and a great deal. If you're looking for it for cheap there, definitely worth a playthrough. I'm just blown away that this is the studio's very first game and they did such a bang up job. I literally cannot wait for what this studio does next. That's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you made it this far, be sure to leave a like on the video and let me know down in the comments below what your favorite part of Lies of P was, and we'll catch you guys on the next video.